The city carried the stink of summer rot even in the cool hours before dawn. Tar and brine came up from the quays, mingled with the sweetness of crushed plums and the sour reek of the fish market where gutters ran slick as eelskins. Light seeped through the eastern clouds, a thin pale wash that showed dust dancing in the tower of the hand's window, as if the sun were stirring motes with a slow finger. Eddard Stark stood with one palm braced to the carved stone and watched King's Landing rouse itself to another day of shouting and wheel rattle. Below, the street of flour lay blue-gray and quiet. In an hour it would be a river of bakers with ash-smudged forearms and boys with baskets, shouting the price of bread. He had counted the sacks unloaded from the ships 3 mornings now, and each morning there had been fewer. "They will feel it first," Varys had whispered last night in his perfumed way, soft enough to pass for a breeze. The bakers, the fishwives, the turtle men who push their carts up from the mud gate. When a city is hungry, it knows whom to blame, Lord Stark. It blames whomever feeds it last. They would feel other things before they were through. Ned kept his hand against the stone to remind himself that the world was hard and cold and could be held. He had been too long in the heat of southern words. A scrap of parchment lay on his table, pressed smooth by a knife hilt. He had written it before the moon tipped west, his script narrow and plain. To Wyman Manderley, Lord of White Harbor and Lord Marshal of the Mander. An order, signed in the careful hand he used when all outcome hung on ink. Close your gates to all crown purveyors and agents acting for the capital. Hold your harbor against ships bearing grain, salted fish, timber, iron, and cloth intended for King's Landing. Take no coin of the crown. Offer safe anchorage to such ships as would turn their course. Spread word among the narrow sea captains that any cargo bound for the Blackwater shall not find contracts in White Harbor, nor letters of credit, until a great council settles the question of succession and restores lawful peace. He had felt the words settle in him as he wrote, like stones placed one after another on the floor of a cold stream to give the foot a way across. It was not steel. It was not the sort of thing that had won Winterfell or held it for 300 years. But the game here was coin and bread and fear, and he had no swords in this city that he could trust. He lifted the knife and rolled the parchment, binding it with plain hemp twine. His wolf's head seal cooled his fingers as he pressed it to the wax. The room smelled faintly of tallow and the last bit of damp from a night bucket. He thought of the god's wood at Winterfell and the clean resinous scent beneath the heart tree, how sound came into its quiet like birds gliding down to water. "Father?" The voice came from his solar door, hesitant. Arya's dark eyes peered around the edge before the rest of her slipped past, all elbows and scuffed knuckles and hair that could never quite be tamed by Septa Mordane's sighs and combs. "You are up early," he said, tucking the letter inside the leather tube on the table, where other tubes already lay ready for ravens. "I couldn't sleep." She stepped up beside him at the window, nose wrinkling. "It smells like a fishmonger's grave. Syrio says a good nose tells a sword when to cut." Syrio says many things. Ned's mouth tugged despite himself. Syrio Farrell had a way with his youngest that even Winterfell's masters-at-arms had not found. "He has given you bruises where no sword has ever lived. They make me remember where I am." Arya's eyes traveled over the city, over the red-painted tiles and packed roofs and the river of smoke beginning to rise from cook fires. "Sansa is still asleep. She dreams of songs. I dream of running." He rested his hand briefly on her head, found the cowlick that always sprang its own way and smoothed it once, twice, knowing it would spring again. "Eat when the trays come," he said, "and no running without your teacher. Not today." "I wasn't going to run." She said it as if she were telling the truth and had somehow asked her body not to betray her. He did not tell her that the city would grow a different sort of edge today, sharper, meaner. He did not yet know it, but he felt it as a man who knows when the ice beneath him grows thin and dark. "Go wake your sister for the sept," he said. "Say your prayers. You never go to the September. My gods do not live there." He kissed her hair and sent her away with a look that made her shoulders square, as if a touch on the head had given her a command a knight might envy. When she had gone, Ned took up the leather tube, fixed its lid, and handed it to Jory Castle with quiet words. "The rookery," he said. "To Maester Pycelle first, then to the White Ravens, Wyman Manderley, and to Lord Hoster at Riverrun. A copy to Bronzeyon Royce in the Vale, and to Lord Stannis at Dragonstone. They must fly before mid-morning." Jory's face tightened, a thin rim to a deep well. "Aye, my lord. And send Tomard east along the river road with another letter for White Harbor. In case crows go missing, he is to buy fresh horses where he can. Tell him not to stop. Some are bound to ask by whose command." "By mine," Ned said. "I am still the hand." He waited after Jory left, listening to the tower settle around him as servants began to move below. A cook shouted, a scullion laughed. Someone dropped a bucket on stone with a metallic clatter that echoed through hall and stair. The city woke, vast and indifferent. He waited as if he could stand so quiet that some answer might climb up through the stone like sap. When the knock came, it was 3 light taps that somehow carried through the door, as if the wood had learned to expect them. "Enter," he said. Varys drifted in with his hands folded, satin whispering. He wore lavender today, sleeves puffed, rings like the eyes of small fish. "The morning greets you with a frown," the eunuch murmured, peering at the window's hard light. "I had hoped to bring some ease. If it is coin, I have too little. If it is advice, I have too much." "Ah!" Varys clasped his fingers. "News, then, which is a sort of advice one does not pay for until too late. The Street of Sisters saw 2 fights before dawn. Sailors of Myr and Tyrosh disputing whose color is more honest. The city watch broke 3 heads and took 6 purses. A baker on the hook had his flour seized by men who claimed to be purveyors for the royal kitchens. Also, how to put it? Someone has sent very swift birds to White Harbor." Ned matched him with silence. Varys's soft face took that as an answer. "I do not ask what you have written," the eunuch went on. "Only whether you have written what your heart told you or what the law demanded, or, most perilous, what you thought men might obey." "I have written Winterfell's truth," Ned said. "Stark truths are white things," Varys murmured. "The sort that show every stain. The capital is an old cloak, my lord. It hides its blotches in shadow." He made a little gesture that could be a bow, could be a shrug. "You have made motions toward a great council. I have asked for one." Asked is a gentle word. Pressed is closer. The boy king is not yet crowned. The queen mother is the queen. To press in such hours is to teach knives to listen. Varys's lashes were as fine as moth dust. When kings plot succession, bakers feel it first. "I told you so. You told me many things." Ned could smell the sea heartier than ever now, as if someone had tilted a basin of brine beside his table. "Will they come? To a council?" Varys pursed his lips. "Stannis will come with every law book in the citadel stuffed into Davos Seaworth's net. Renly will come with his smile and tilt the room until the reach slides in after him. The Lannisters will send gold, and the gold will speak in voices we cannot trace. And the Tyrells will bring bread carts and look like saints while they measure the price of forgiveness. As for the Vale, Lady Lisa will bar her gates and write 3 letters of no to every letter of yes. But Bronzeyon is a man who believes the world should be hammered into shape. He may come. The Riverlands, if Lord Hoster can sit a saddle without coughing blood, they will follow him. If not, they will follow the man who says his name loudest. And the North," Ned said. "The North will come." Varys's voice softened. "It obeys its own winter, but the way is long. It knows the way." Ned looked again to the morning. The blue had broken and horns were sounding by the river. If the city grows hungry, the queen will be forced to hear a council, or forced to find food. Varys's smile was nothing. When a city is starving, it will take bread from the hands that beat it. It does not ask the law's leave to feed its children. Ask yourself who has grain. That is who the city will kneel to. "Highgarden," Ned said. He had dreamed it in colder words in the small hours. "The reach can feed the world. Then we must not expect the world to move merely because the hand writes." Varys tilted his head. "May I counsel something that will not stain your white truth? You may speak. Do not write to the queen." He lifted a plump hand as Ned's brows drew. "I do not mean remain silent. I mean speak before men. Speak where oaths live. Ask the High Septon to bless your call for a council, and ask the City Watch to guard the steps of the Great September when the lords come to speak. Do not trust daggers in the alleys. Trust 1,000 eyes and ears. The Queen cannot break a council watched by all the 7, though she may wish to. The Queen can break the men who come to it. She is not the only one who makes breaks." Varys folded his hands. "If you must threaten her, do not threaten with steel." "With what, then?" "With cold." Varys looked toward the harbor as if he could see past walls and roofs to the masts beyond. "Close the doors that men do not see. I think you have begun." He bowed and was gone on quiet sols. Ned breathed once, deep, as if he could fill his chest with northern air, and turned to his table again. There were other letters to write. To Robb at Winterfell, with words that could not panic a first command but should teach him the shape of caution. To Ser Barristan, whose honor might still be a blade that gleamed despite the grease that had touched it in this city. To Stannis, whom he had already written with the line of seed like iron filings settling to show the hidden magnet. Jon Arryn had died for that line. The ink felt like blood when it fell from duck quill to white. He wrote and sealed, until the bells spoke prime from the Great September and the light came through the window like a winter sun that had lost its heat somewhere on the King's Road. He sent the last tube to Jory and then called for his breakfast. He did not mean to eat. He made himself chew bread and honey until the taste came back to him and he could drink watered wine without thinking of blood in water. Then he buckled the hand's brooch to his breast and went down into the heat. On the river, a brown-sailed galley moved like a slow blade through penny-bright water. It flew the Crown and Stag, half its oars in, half out, as if the lacings of the world had been loosened and the rowers no longer pulled to one rhythm. Men crowded the wharfhead, men in dun and in blue, in aprons and in leather. When Ned stepped into the day, he heard them, a sound like wind off snow. A murmur that held a question, and the question was bread. He took the long way to the Red Keep that morning, along the riverfront, with Jory and Tomard and a pair of guards in gray cloaks at his shoulder. He wanted the smell of tar and fish and sweat. He wanted to see where the city breathed. A baker's boy darted past them with a round loaf under his arm, a crust ridged like a turtle shell and hot enough to burn his wrist. 2 women went after him, one with hair the color of rusted iron, one with a braid down her back like a hawser. They were not after the boy. They were after the heat of the loaf itself and the way it steamed the air. The boy laughed as he ran, and Ned wondered how many more mornings the boy would laugh if the barrels came up light again. At the mud gate, a cart piled with onions had dumped 2 baskets into the muck. The onions lay like jewels, skins slick, the mud sucking at them with tender sounds. A guard with a fish for a badge prodded them with his spear, and one of the women scolded him as if the spear were a sin. A Tyroshi with striped beard and little rings in his ears argued at the customs shed with a man who wore the watches black and gold. Not for the city watch, but for the tariffs. Ned stood and watched until the Tyroshi slammed a narrow shovel of coins onto the table and stormed off, calling sea gods to witness. A gull walked into the customs house, peered about with one bright eye, and stalked out as if unimpressed with the affairs of men. This is the city, he thought, 1,000 desires braided into one choke. He climbed the hill to the Red Keep with sweat pricking his collar and the weirwood face in his mind, the sorrow of it. Jory's breath came evenly. Tomard had begun to curse the sun. When Ned passed through the great doors, the thickness of the walls took the heat from his skin. Ser Barristan Selmy was waiting in the shadow of a pillar like a statue that had discovered dignity. "My Lord Hand," he said. "Ser Barristan." Ned took the old knight's measure, as he always did, and knew he found the same thing as before. A man built of the old metal, hammered and quenched. "May I claim your counsel?" "Always." Ser Barristan's eyes were very blue, the blue of old iron washed too long in a river. "If I may claim yours in turn. Let us swap them, then, and call it a fair trade." Ned led him into a small solar where the sun came through a narrow slit and lit dust like silver. He poured watered wine for them both and closed the door. Men are saying there will be trouble in the streets. Barristan held the cup without drinking. The bakers say their flour is stale by the time it comes upriver and dear before it is sold. The fishwives say the best is being taken for the royal kitchens. The small folk say many things. They say true enough. Ned told him what he had set in motion, plain and unadorned. He watched Barristan's face as he spoke the words Great Council. For a moment the old knight looked past Ned, at something only he could see, and his eyes softened. "We should have held one when Ares died," he said. "It is what should be done when a king dies badly and the realm has forgotten what right looks like. Will you stand for it?" Ned said, "I stand for the realm." Barristan's mouth went hard. "I have stood for kings who did the realm no good. It is an old shame. There are worse shames. If there is a council, I will draw my oath as if it were a sword and hold it where all can see. The law is a better master than any man, even a just one. Stannis would agree with you. Then I fear he will need friends." Barristan drank and made a face, as if watered wine offended him at last after all these years. "The queen will not come because men ask her nicely. If you mean to do this under the eyes of the seven, I will stand where I can keep a clear path and a clear conscience. Your path may be through your own brothers. I have no brothers. I have only my cloak." Something moved behind his eyes when he said it, a small pain that fit between words. "And my sword. Keep them ready," Ned said. "There will be motion enough." "Motion, yes." Barristan set the cup down as if it might bruise. "And counter-motion. I have seen the little man speaking with the Lord of the Coin. The master of whisperers flows where no one sees him. The small council is a bowl of eels, my lord. You put your hand in, you must expect a bite." "I will wear gloves," Ned said dryly. The old knight gave what, in another man, would be a smile. They parted with no more said, but Ned felt the weight of a sword set beside him, as if a good piece of steel had been leaned where he could reach it when it was time. When the small council met, Pycelle sniffed and mumbled about the proper forms and ancient precedents for assemblies, and whether a great council could be called without a regent name to call it. "One cannot put the cart before the oxen," he wheezed, "or the oxen before the plow, or the plow in a field that has not been." "The field is on fire," Peter Baelish interrupted cheerfully. He was playing with a coin as he always seemed to do, making it vanish and reappear as if he could teach gold to wink. "Best plow what one can before the flames move. The hand would put the capital to the torch," Cersei said flatly. She had entered after the others and sat now like an unsheathed blade, green eyes brighter than any gem. "I suppose it saves time to starve the beggars before he executes their betters." "Your Grace." Ned felt the room lean as voices shifted toward her the way grass leans toward sun. "I propose a council to settle law because I will not see boys set upon thrones by lies. The city's bellies will not bow to lies either. I mean to keep the peace." "You keep a northern peace," Cersei said. "Boys grow blue under such blanket. In the south we keep a different kind. It often looks like a garden. Sometimes one must weed it, Lord Stark. I am told you are too tender-hearted to weed." "I am told you are not," Ned said. Her smile came and went like a knife drawn and sheathed. "If you mean to summon the lords of the realm, summon them. Perhaps they will come and tell you whose child sits the throne." "The king's child sits the throne," Pycelle murmured hastily. "We shall find out," Ned said. He turned his gaze to Baelish. "Buy no grain for the royal stores without my hand upon the account. No more purveyors breaking into bakeries. No more city watchmen pressing flour for their wives' kitchens and calling it the king's demand." Baelish flicked the coin into the air and caught it with 2 fingers. "If there is no grain to buy, my signature saves us no coin. If there is grain to buy, we will pay thrice what we did a month ago. Still, I am a man who enjoys a good list. I will make lists of granaries and sacks and prices until I dream in ledgers. But tell me, Lord Hand, what will your raven to the north profit us in the baker's ovens on the morrow?" "Less than your tongue," Cersei said. "Spare me both." He met her gaze until she looked away first, and then they set the day for announcing the call, 2 days hence, with the High Septon's blessing if it could be had. Varus would have that for him, or would have a reason why a blessing could not be had without making it sound like a blessing in itself. He left the council with parchment clinging to his thoughts like spider silk and climbed to his solar with the city in his ears. By Vespers, the bells were discordant. The galley flying Stag and Crown had berthed, and 6 casks from its hold went straight to the Red Keep. The story lay in those casks. Men in the Street of Flower told it as they watched carts roll past. The king eats while his people go lean. By nightfall, 2 bakers' shops had been broken into by boys with quick hands and quicker feet. The city watch had caught one, they always catch one, and shaved his head and put him in stocks where he cried without making a sound. Ned passed him with Arya in his shadow as they returned from the god's wood that was no god's wood, a tiny grove of herbs trapped in a cloister, and he kept walking because if he stopped he would know. T start again. In White Harbor the sea carried a different smell, cold and iron-laden. Gulls swirled and shouted as men on the Newcastle's seaward wall hauled up the chain that could be dropped to bar the inner harbor mouth. The chain was old, older than Wyman Manderley's grandfather, and men cursed it with the kind of fondness men reserve for stubborn things that have kept their fathers safe. Wyman Manderley himself sat in the merman's court beneath a tapestry of green wool and pearl, where a fat-limbed merman offered a cup to a woman whose face was half smile, half rumor. The dais creaked when Wyman shifted. A man with fewer chins would have shifted more often. He held Ned Stark's letter in one hand, and his other hand lay upon the head of a seal wrought in brass where the arm of his chair ended. His maester, Theo Moore, stood near the brazier, though the day needed no brazier. "The hand of the king orders an embargo," Theo Moore said, as if the words were sausage meat to be skinned and stuffed into some useful casing. "He asks us to, how does he put it, hold our harbor against ships bearing relief for the capital. He further asks we spread the word among the narrow sea captains that any cargo bound for the Blackwater shall find no contracts in White Harbor, nor letters of credit until a great council." "He asks like a Stark," Wyman said. His voice came out low, honeyed by age. "He does not bargain, he does not whine. He puts the cold before you and asks if you will breathe it. It is an honest way to die or to live. We do much trade with the capital," Theo Moore said reluctantly. "Granaries in the city have coins with our marks on them. If we pull our hand away, we shall lose it when it is thrust back under the table. Our hand is fat with fish and timber," Wyman said, "and the north will keep us fed. The capital will not starve for want of White Harbor's gifts. It will starve for want of peace." He looked down at the letter and saw Ned's plain script as if it had been carved into ice. "We will close our harbor to crown purveyors. We will do more than that." He turned his head toward the steps below the dais. Lamprey, a knight with a face like a pleased eel, stepped forward and bowed until his bald spot shone. He had not always been called Lamprey. Names in White Harbor had a way of sticking fast once Wyman grew fond of them. "Send word to the Sea Lord's factors," Wyman said. "We will extend no credit to agents for King's Landing. Any man who wants to send coin from Bravos to the king must float it in a bucket and see if the tide is kind. Also, pay retainers to 3 Lycini captains and buy them patience. We will have our own eyes in the gullet, and we will know whose sails fill with Reach wind and whose with Lannister breath. And send word quietly to Dragonstone. House Manderley honors debts just as Stannis Baratheon honors law." "You mean to kiss the Lord of Dragonstone's bony fingers?" Lamprey's eyes shone. "I mean to show him I know which bones hold a realm together, and send a letter to Riverrun. Lord Hoster Tully will cough, and his daughter will sit when he coughs. Tell them the Manderleys stand for a council. Tell them we have shut our gates and our purses to the capital. If the river lords shut their fords to Lannister levies, every man will learn what he needs to learn." Theo Moore stirred. "My lord, there is the Iron Bank. There is always the Iron Bank." Wyman smiled with all the gentleness of a winter tide. "Let them count our loyalty as an asset on their ledgers. It lasts longer than gold." He watched Lamprey hurry away with the joy of a man given gossip to turn into coin. He thought of his sons. Wylus, bookish and careful, with a look sometimes like a hare eared for a hawk, and Wendell, who loved a good table and could laugh hard enough to shake lanterns. Wyllis would counsel caution. Wendell would counsel dinner with anyone who needed to be charmed. Wyman had learned long ago that the best meal to serve a realm was patience, even if men found it tasteless. When Davos Seaworth came up the White Knife 3 days later on a Lysini galley with black-sailed discretion, Wyman was already waiting in the solar that looked out over quays where barrels looked small as marbles from so far above. Davos smelled of pitch and salt and the faint onions that had given him his other name. He had clean hands that mattered more to Wyman than many lords would admit. "My lord," Davos said, bowing as if the weight of the sea sat easy on his back. "You have brought me a letter from Lord Stannis. I can smell the iron on it." Wyman held out a hand, palm up. Davos drew the letter from inside his doublet and placed it on Wyman's palm with care, as if he were giving a man's heart back to him. Wyman broke the wax and read. Stannis's hand was as stingy as his speech, lines spare and without flourish. The words were the law nailed to a door. Joffrey is not the king. The realm must choose law over bastard pretense. A council convened by the great houses will choose rightly or show itself unfit to rule. "You have tied your boat to a stone," Wyman said when he had done. "The stone holds better than a rotting pier," Davos replied. He looked at Wyman without flinching, though he knew, Wyman guessed, that there were men in this room who could buy his boat 3 times over and not miss the coin. "Lord Stannis means to hold the gullet clear of ships bound to feed the Queen's defiance. Your captains can help me see who pretends to be blind. And if Highgarden sends 100 cogs with wheat piled to their rails?" Wyman asked mildly. "Then we will weigh their sails with need and see if they tear," Davos said. "If the Reach feeds the city, they will feed it at a price. If they mean to be saints, I will die surprised." Wyman tasted that and found it honest. "You have sons," he said, not sure why he asked. "Aye." Davos's mouth softened around the word as if it hurt. "One who prays too much, one who fights too little, 3 who smell of fish, a little one who likes to climb where the wind blows hardest. And you carry letters where kings fear their fingers will go." Wyman felt the tug of respect, that clean muscle. "Very well. I will hire your black-sailed friends for a season. I will pay them to keep their knives in their belts unless you ask otherwise." "They will keep them until I ask twice," Davos said, and Wyman laughed like a wave hitting stone. "Bring me lists," Wyman said, growing serious. "Flags, crews, owners. Who owes for repairs at the rope walk and who got too drunk to weigh anchor last winter's first snow. The city is far from here, Master Davos, but even docks that do not touch can tilt the same way if wind strikes them right." Davos nodded. "I will bring you such lists. And if you mean to send me any letters bound for Dragonstone or beyond, I can keep them under my ribs where even gulls cannot find them." Wyman's eyes fell again to Stannis's words, the hard spelling of iron. "I have letters," he said. So Davos went back down the river with 2 white ravens beating across the high air in a direction no man could see, and Wyman manderly set about closing a harbor without slamming a single door loudly against anyone with ears to listen for such slamming. He told Lamprey to tell the harbor masters to lean against the wind in such a way that ships meant for the capital felt it as a drag. Tolls changed. Barges lingered in channels for reasons too dull to argue. Scales were suddenly calibrated to according to law, not according to friendship. And the word went quietly among Manderley's men that temporary mistakes might be made in turning the wrong cargoes the wrong way, if those cargoes had the wrong seals. In King's Landing, wrong seals grew fatter as the days grew longer. The bread lines grew. The bakers spread what flour they had thinner, the way a miser spreads butter so you can count the holes in the bread. Joffrey, who had not earned mornings yet, slept past prime and went out to the yard to shoot boys with blunted arrows until the master-at-arms complained the shafts were snapping. Sansa tried to think of him as songs had taught her to think of princes, but her thoughts had learned to look around corners. Arya went barefoot in the training room and learned how not to be where a stick fell. Septa Mordain tooted until her throat must have ached. Ned moved among these things as a winter star moves among fires boys think are bright. He went to the great September with Varus in his shadow and stood before a high septon who smelled of sweet oils and had a voice like a hive filled with slow bees. "It is not my place to meddle in kingly matters," the high septon murmured, fingers lying like pale slugs on the arm of his chair. "But it is the place of the faith to bless peace. If the great lords mean to speak before the eyes of the seven, I cannot close my eyes without looking like a man who will not see. Those who will not see often keep their eyes." Varus's whisper did not move the air. "We ask only that you let the small folk see you pray for peace when men come to speak for it." "I can pray for anything," the high septon sighed. "I am a priest. Berthida, bring me the purple oil. It makes my prayers seem more serious." Ned named a day 10 days hence. A raven flew that night from the sept's loft with the blessing wound into its foot like another string. More ravens flew from the Red Keep, and some never reached any rookeries at all. Men as quick on roofs as cats are quick in rafters took some and sold them to a man who smelled of garlic and had a ring with a little mockingbird on it. Those ravens told the wrong men the right things. They did not change the day. In the Riverlands, Caitlin Stark came to the Crossroads Inn with Ser Roderick and found a dwarf at a table with a juggler, a singer, and a wolfish man with sad eyes. Her fingers tightened on the ale-stained rail before she had a thought to do so. Old fear moved faster than new judgment. It would be easy to stand and call men to her, easy to name the dwarf as the one who had put a blade at Bran's throat with hired hands, easy to tear the realm along an old cut. It would feel like power, and it would be power, the sort that comes when you ask a wound to open again. Roderick's breath sounded wheezy beside her. "My lady," his mustache bristled, wanting a command. Caitlin held the rail tighter until her knuckles whitened. She saw the juggler spill 3 knives and catch 2. She saw the dwarf's pale hair and clever eyes and the almost kind way he listened to a blind singer's tale. She saw the inn's hearth and the mud outside and the folk with their bowls. She let go of the rail. "We will go upstairs," she said. "We will sleep and we will ride. We have a letter to carry to my father. The realm must not tear because I am angry." Roderick looked at her as if she had grown taller. "Aye, my lady." Tyrion Lannister turned his head as she passed his table. He smiled a little, a courtesy he had learned to use where being small did not serve. "My lady of Winterfell," he said. She paused with a piece of her wanting to be foolish and a larger piece wanting to be brave. "My lord of Lannister," she said, and went on. Later she would lie in the straw-brushed room and hear rain begin, and she would think of her boy in his bed with the wolf curled long as a dream at his feet. She would think of Ned's letters. She would think of a council of lords and how men of honor could sometimes keep other men honest. Far south and east, in a castle of black stone shaped like fire turned to rock, Stannis Baratheon stood on Dragonstone's sea terrace with his jaw clenched and watched lightning heave over the narrow sea. He held the latest raven's tidings like flints. Men in King's Landing grumbled and asked where their bread was. Men in White Harbor moved as if they could teach the sea to obey law. Men in Old Town counted grain to the grain with a care that made the counting itself a sort of sin. He had sent Davos to White Harbor with his letters and his faith. He did not trust faith as a rule, but he trusted Davos. Melisandre stood in the lee of a dragon's gargoyle and watched the same sky. "The night is full of storms," she said. "Perhaps that is why the flames do not show me everything I wish to see." "The flames show you nothing," Stannis said curtly. "They make you dream in red." "They show you law," Melisandre said softly. "Law burned on the world in letters so bright men have to look away. Do not speak to me of law as if it were a god that sits beside your fire. Law is a thing men shape or betray." Stannis's mouth twisted. "Men have told me I am made of law like iron. Perhaps I am. Iron rusts. Burned wood is nothing but ash." "You will sit where your brother sat," Melisandre said, her voice a murmur the wind could not quite take. "Not because fire says so, but because the world cannot endure a lie that big without tearing. Men feel such rents in their sleep. They wake and do not know why they are angry. They blame the smell. They blame bread gone dear. They will find their anger's name." "I will find mine in a council hall," Stannis said. I will not beg breadmen for their favor. I will ask them to open their books and read where it says the king must be what the blood gives him and not what the bed whispers. Some beds whisper very loudly, Melisandre smiled. Do not be deaf when the world is making a new music. He said nothing more. The sea made its old music below. In Highgarden, where water spoke in softer voices, Renly Baratheon sat with Mace Tyrell and looked out through vines heavy with grapes as men unloaded carts of grain in the forecourt like ants moving pale stones. Marjorie Tyrell took a dove from a lady's hand and let it sit on her own, her hair dark as polished chestnut. Loras Tyrell watched her with the mixture of pride and impatience only a younger brother bears. They will glow for you, Renly said to Mace, meaning the city. Mace blinked his heavy lids. Glow. When your carts roll up the street of flower with the stag and the rose on their banners. Renly smiled like light on steel. You will be the man who fed them when the queen was counting her jewels. The hand asks for a counsel. Let us be merciful. Let us send 50 carts and hold 500. Let the city see our love and our limits. Mace Tyrell stroked the droop of his mustache. 50 carts is a parade. The queen will want to ride at their head. The queen can choke on her own necklace, Loras said, too quickly. He colored. I mean, she will not share the glory. She will take it. Renly's smile thinned. So let us take what she cannot. The blessing. I will go to the sept before I ride. I will kiss the High Septon's ring. I will speak of a council and peace. And you will hold those 500 carts where the wind can cool them. If the city wants them, it can want what follows with them. Which is? Marjorie asked. She moved the dove from one hand to the other, delighting in its small feet. A new kind of music, Renly said softly, remembering a red priestess in a story Davos had told once, and not knowing why the story clung. One with flutes and roses. Marjorie laughed. I like music with roses. Then your brother must keep his swords from deafening everyone, Mace said, smiling for once with simple pride. We will send 50 carts. We will shine like lanterns at dusk. Lanterns at dusk draw moths. They also show how dark the edges are. The day came when the Great Council was to be announced before the people, and the Great September Steps were a river of cloth. Men wore their best for their gods and their worst for each other. Ned stood with the small council, the Kingsguard, and a flank of city watch too shiny to be trusted. Janos Slint had a puffed chest and a moist lip. 100 white candles were burning inside where the air hung heavy. Outside, the air was thinner with fear. The High Septon came to the top of the steps, 2 acolytes bearing his train like men who wished to set down a dear burden but knew they could not be seen to wish it. The crowd's silence washed up against the stone like an incoming wave that had found its shore at last. Cersei stood with Joffrey at her shoulder. The boy king looked bored and proud by turns, as if he thought boredom were a royal virtue when one had to wait for people to kneel. The High Septon lifted his hands and the 100 bells on his sleeves made delicate music. Good people of King's Landing, he murmured, and the murmuring flowered in its turn as men told other men what he had said. The realm has known sorrow. It has known confusion. In such times we remember that the 7 have 7 eyes and see in many ways. Let us then gather in the sight of gods and men to affirm what is true. A great council is called, 10 days hence, at Harrenhal, where the Riverlands meet the Vale and the Crownlands meet the North. There the lords of the realm shall speak and hear and decide what the law says in this matter of succession. Let no man break the peace before the law speaks, for the stranger has many hands. He lifted a hand to bless the crowd, and a voice in that crowd cried, thin and fierce, bread! It seemed to Ned that the word ran down the steps like a thrown stone bouncing. Bread, 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 until it hit a shield and broke. The city watch shifted their staves. One man moved a hair early and struck a shoulder when he meant to make a space. The shoulder belonged to a woman carrying a child. The child began to wail. The wail was the song many had been hearing in their sleep. Cersei's mouth tightened. Joffrey laughed and pointed, as if a street player had slipped on his own orange peel. The High Septon began to sing a prayer to drown the wail, and his voice shook and grew louder until it sounded like a bell being rung inside his throat. Ned stepped one pace to the edge of the stair and lifted his hand. "Peace," he called, his voice carrying because men wanted it to carry. "You will have bread today. 50 carts from the reach stand at the mud gate. The Queen will open them. Let them be brought beneath the hill so each may see there is food." He did not look at Cersei, and that was what made men believe a little. The noise shifted, turning like fish in a net. Joffrey muttered something to his mother, and she snapped her fan shut without moving her eyes. "Lord Baelish," she said softly. "Attend me." Peter Baelish smiled and went. The carts rolled in under banners of green and gold, and the small folk craned and cried. Mace Tyrell rode at their head in a show of humility. No jewels, only a rich mantle, only 20 men with helms bright as mirrors. Renly rode beside him with teeth very white and gave bread out with his own hands from the first cart, as if the loaves weighed nothing and his fingers had never closed around anything sharper. He lifted a loaf high so the crowd could see the rise, and he smiled up at the Queen, who was a figure on a step of stone. "Bread," he called, "for the king's people. Bread and a council." The crowd did not cheer. It breathed, and then it cheered. Yano Slint's men made a lane and the carts rolled where they were told to roll. Ned watched faces change, watched shoulders lower. The city had not eaten yet, but it had seen something close to eating, and that can hold men a little while. He glanced at Ser Barristan, who stood as if a wind were trying to push him and finding it could not. He glanced at Varys, who watched the world with the care of a mother for a sick child. He glanced at Peter Baelish, who looked so pleased that Ned's fingers itched. The day of the council came before the city could grow hungry again. Harrenhal smoked on its lake, like something that ought not have been born and had learned to live anyway. The towers rose black and twisted as burnt fingers. Fishers on the gods, I said the castle drew thunder when storms moved across the vale. Men in the Riverlands swore the gods held their breath whenever the hall's doors opened. It was a good place for men to test themselves against the things they feared. Ned thought when he rode beneath its broken teeth, flanked by Stark men and Tully men and a guard of Arryn lords under Bronze Yon's grim eye. Harrenhal's great hall had eaten kings and knights and singers. It had room for 300 men to sit where 50 men might talk sense. They sat all the same, the air gloom-cool even in high summer. The High Septon had sent a legate to bless the chamber, a thin man with careful hands. The Citadel had sent 2 archmasters who had already begun to dislike each other's chains in a manner so polite it was like watching finely dressed cats pretend to help with a funeral. The first day the lords argued about the chair. "It must not be raised above any other," Jon Royce said. He wore bronze leafwork that made him look like a living statue of himself. "Let the chair sit level with the others. The law does not sit on a throne. Let the chair be raised above all," a lord of the Crownlands replied. "The council speaks with the king's voice. We are not small folk who prate under a hedge." "Make 2 chairs," someone said from the reach benches, and everyone turned to see Loras Tyrell standing behind his lord father. "One for what the law is, and one for what the law should be." "You are a child playing at wit," a man from the Stormlands snapped. "That is possible," Loras said, smiling like a blade. "It is more likely that I am a child playing at war. That is what you prefer." "Let the chair be a bench," Ned said into the swell. "Stannis Baratheon claims by law. Joffrey Baratheon claims by name and by custom. Let them sit side by side if they will, and let their men stand behind them while maesters put the words down like weights on a scale." There were mutters and there were nods. In the end, a pair of benches stood at the hall's center, low, rough, the wood hastily planed, as if men wished the realm to see that no one meant to be comfortable here. Stannis came like a winter afternoon, bringing his own weather. Davos Seaworth stood behind him looking like a man who had slept on rope in a hold and had liked the way it steadied him in storms. Renly came with a procession that smelled of crushed pear and oil of rose. Men let him charm them because it is easier to be charmed than to be just. Cersei did not come. She sent the Lord Commander of the King's Guard and Pycelle and Peter Baelish, who sat with grace as if grace were a cloak he had found a way to have tailored. Joffrey did not come. He sent a banner. Ned took his bench with a sense of stone finding its bed. He had brought with him a book that Jon Arryn had touched, the one with the line that had cost the old man his life. He had brought Tobo Mott's apprentice, a quiet boy with black hair too dark to be any Lannisters. He had brought Maester Luwin's letter written in cool Winterfell ink that said how seed shows itself. He had brought Barristan Selmy's word, that last he had not asked for. It had come of its own accord like snow seeking the ground. They called witnesses. They read from dusty pages and fresh ones. They sent for a maester from Duskendale who spoke of lordly bastards and the way the realm had always been quick to deny one sort and slow to deny another. They summoned a septon from Maidenpool who had kept a register and could show by dates a thing men in the hall did not wish to see. They asked the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard to speak, and Barristan rose and said very simply that he had served 3 kings and had hated one and had obeyed them all until the realm dissolved beneath him, and that he would not see it dissolve again without saying this. That if the law did not bind a king as much as a beggar, then it was not law but only a thing petty men dressed in words to scare children. He did not name Joffrey. He did not say incest. He said law, and the way he said it put a sword on the table. Pycelle huffed and blew and found reasons to set the sword aside. He spoke of peace and of precedents that were not so precedent as all that. He spoke of the danger of making a realm learn a new name for king when it had already begun to whisper the old one. A boy who wakes each day thinking himself king will find a way to make men bleed if we take away his dream, he quavered. In charity, my lords, in prudence. Prudence is not fear, Stannis said without rising. Charity is not theft. Renly spoke as if he were calling for music. We must not make the realm's children orphans. The law can wait on a marriage. It can wait on better weather and better tempers. Cousins marry cousins. Sisters' sons become like brothers in the eyes of men if not gods. I will wed and bind the reach to the Stormlands, and we will steady the city while the boy learns what his place must be. The boy is not a king, Stannis said, and for a heartbeat the hall sounded like a foundry, iron striking iron. When the first day ended, men went to their pallets and slept poorly. The voice of Baelor Spells came across the night in a manner no one could explain, soft and sweet and very far away. In White Harbor, gulls dozed on posts driven into wet wood and dreamed gull dreams while Lamprey counted, and Theomore wrote lists worthy of Davos Seaworth. On the second day, Eddard Stark asked to speak last, and men muttered and then became very quiet. He did not say sons of kings nor hair of kings, though men could see both in the things set before them on the table. He spoke instead of roads. A realm is a road between 2 places, he said. Winterfell to King's Landing, the Wall to the Arbor, Dorne to the Dreadfort. The road is made of promises, and men ride it because they trust those promises. If you tell them the road goes to a king and the road goes instead to a lie, then you have made the road a trap. Men will stop riding it. They will take paths through fields. They will make their own roads with other men. That is war. Pycelle coughed. These are pretty words. They are hard words, Ned said. Because they mean we must put aside our fear that hungry boys will throw stones and our fear that lords will lose their faces in mirrors. We must say that law is the road. The law says the king's son must be the king. It does not say the queen's son must be the king. It does not say the son of her brother must be the king. It does not say a well-loved man must be the king. It says, if a king dies, his brother takes his place, when there is no true-born son of the body. He reached for the book and put his hand on it because a man's hand on a book says what he believes as much as his mouth can. This is not a pretty book. It is lists of birth and hair and who begot whom. It does not sing. It does not whisper. It does not ask to be liked. It is what the citadel keeps so we may know what the world is when our love of it makes it difficult to see. He looked around the hall and thought of Winterfell's godswood, and he felt a little of its clean, cold settle in him. You can make a lie king. You can dress it in velvet and give it a coin with a stag on it. But the lie will be a lie when the velvet rots. Or you can put a hard man on a hard chair because the law is hard. If Lord Stannis sits it, I do not expect to be praised by him, and I do not expect him to bake bread for the city at dawn. I expect him to claim the duties of a king as well as the rights, to defend the realm even when it does not cheer him, to keep the roads passable, to hear even petitions he hates, to pay debts, yes, to the Iron Bank, and to the poorest fishwife whose husband dies in some forgotten levy. If you set him aside because you fear him, you teach every child in this hall that liking a thing makes it true. He stopped and was surprised at the way the hall held the silence for him, as if it liked it there. Renly rose, smiling like a man who knew he could charm a storm. I do not deny that the law is the law, he said lightly. But the law is not a god we cannot petition. It was made by men. It was made to bind men. Let it bind us to a better peace than a winter of hunger. Make me regent. Let the boy sit in his mother's lap and learn that lap's end. Let us set a date for the boy to be tested by the faith and the realm in 3 years' time. And if he does not pass, I will hold the chair out and give my brother my hand. Men stirred. The sound had the shape of relief. To put off a thing is to change it, and men always think themselves clever when they do so. Stannis's mouth went white. I will not be regent by a child in a green velvet coat, he said. Then do not be, Renly replied. But do not ask farmers to cut their last loaf in two while you consult a book. You will find the book easier to read when your belly is not scolding you. Davos leaned and touched Stannis's shoulder. The gesture looked like a man reminding another that there was a ship under him and it would float if he let it. Stannis did not shrug it off. He looked around the hall at faces he had learned to mislike because they had not liked him first. In the end, they did not vote that day. They sent messengers to King's Landing with words that felt as heavy as coins. Cersei read them beneath a window where the light came dull and constant, and laughed once, short and without breath. They want me to bring my son to Harrenhal and let them put him on a bench, she said to Baelish, who stood as if he were measuring the room for new furnishings. I will bring them a bench of my own, one with straps. Your Grace, Baelish said softly. There are 50 carts of bread standing in the Rivergate courtyard, and the small folk now understand what bread looks like when it comes with conditions. If you send men with straps into a hall with 50 lords and half as many maesters, the straps will come back with different names. Better to send smiles. Smiles always fit. Renly's smiles, she spat. They fit beautifully, Baelish murmured. But they are expensive. So buy fewer. I am bought, Your Grace. I know what you are. She turned away. Tell Janos to keep his men ready. Tell Pycelle to write a letter that looks learned and says nothing. Tell the Lord Commander he may go if he wishes. I will not gift him martyrdom, but I do not need him to burn his conscience on my hearth. Baelish bowed in that way he had that made the bow seem to mock itself. As you command. And the bread carts. Let them roll, she said. Let the city see that I can feed it without asking permission of men who wear bronze on their sleeves. When the messengers returned to Harrenhal with the Queen's flint, the hall grew like a storm sky. They argued and men shouted, and in the third hour, when the air had grown thick with breath and the candle smoke had smudged the sense out of some men's eyes, a low chant rose at the doors and came into the hall like a slow tide. Bread, bread, bread. Men went to the doors and opened them and found small folk there. They had crossed half the Riverlands in carts behind Mace Tyrell's first 50 and had slept under hedges and under barges and on steps outside Seps. They had come to the hall because they had understood something, and that something had made their feet clever. The chant did not threaten. It requested that, more than anger, can move men who fear to be called cruel. Bronze Yohn Royce went to the threshold and said they could not enter, and the small folk nodded as if they had expected that and kept singing bread in voices like water over stone. Renly went to the threshold and lifted a child to his hip, and the chant changed because he smiled, but it did not stop. Stannis stood on the hall floor and did not move, and the chant washed over him like a river over a rock. Ned stood between the benches and felt the city in that sound despite the miles. We cannot be ruled by bakers, a lord from the Crownlands barked. We can be killed by them, Yohn Royce said dryly. Ask anyone who has ever tried to steal a pie. It should not have been funny. Men laughed anyway and then felt better for laughing where anger had been yawning to swallow them. When they were quiet again, the Archmaester from Old Town with the leaden link for accounts and the golden one for sums, rose from his stool and said in a voice as thin as parchment, "We will vote." They wrote on slips of parchment as narrow as finger bones. They wrote names. They wrote Stannis. They wrote Joffrey. Renly's name found its way onto some slips. Renly's smile took the place of votes on others. The acolytes collected the slips in a bowl beaten from copper, and the bowl made a small sound as each parchment fell. Davos Seaworth stood where he could see Stannis's mouth twitch each time it sounded like a coin. Baelish stood where he could see how men's eyes looked when they cast their slips. He would remember those eyes on a winter night when other slips mattered as much. They counted. They counted twice. They counted again because one of the Archmaesters had, without meaning to, wept onto the bowl and insisted it had ruined something. The vote came out like iron scratched on slate. Stannis of House Baratheon, by the law of the land and the consent of the lords assembled, is king. It was not overwhelming. It was not a wave that flattened every tent. It was a thing that needed guarding. Renly bowed, deep and theatrical, and every man in the hall noticed that the bow was deep enough to hide his eyes, which were not smiling. When he came up, he said in a voice that might have charmed an adder, "I will kiss my brother's ring. I will also expect him to eat with knives made of bread for some time. The realm is hungry. We must feed it." Stannis looked as if someone had asked him to kneel to a stone. He held out his hand. Renly kissed the knuckles. Men breathed as if they had forgotten how. Eddard Stark did not smile, because smiles in such moments make men think you have stopped being watchful. He looked toward Barristan Selmy, who gave him a nod that felt like a sword hilt pressing into his palm. He looked toward Jon Royce, who had gone quiet and grave as if he had just placed a heavy stone properly into a wall. He looked toward Davos, who had closed his eyes briefly as if saying a prayer to a god of storms that did not answer but sometimes listened. When they left the hall by twos and threes to send word to their keeps, the small folk on the steps fell quiet for once and their chant broke into talk. Some went away smiling. Some went away thinking about how far the next 50 carts would be. The dusk laid its violet hand on the towers, and Harrenhal held its breath as if in an old habit. In King's Landing, Cersei's face hardened as she read the envoy's words. She put down the parchment and stood for a long time without moving. In some rooms, when a woman stands so long without moving, nothing happens outside that room. In King's Landing, heat went on rising from stone no matter what a queen did with her breathing. "Summon the city watch to the Red Keep," she said quietly. "Have them line the yards." Janos Slint came in his polished breastplate and flattered the light by reflecting it. "Your Grace," he said, and bowed as if gravity, too, obeyed him. "The lords have made a toy king," Cersei said. "We must keep the true one safe until we can break their toy. Your Grace speaks wisdom. You will take your men to the Mud Gate. You will send half to the King's Gate. The rest will line the Street of Flower. If the small folk get restless, you will show them what happens to men who mistake bread for law." Slint's eyes showed too much. "Aye, Your Grace. And send for Ser Barristan," she added. "Tell him he may go to his new king if he wishes, and tell him he may wear his cloak when he goes." Slint frowned, turning the words like unfamiliar fruit. "Your Grace, I do not need him. I need men who understand that a cloak is cloth. If he goes, let it be remembered that I did not strip him." The day after the council, a white raven cut the air over the Red Keep and a brown one with it. The white said winter was a bird's dream for now. The brown said the hall had spoken. Varys took that bird with hands a surgeon might envy and brought it to Cersei on a tray as if it were a sweet. "They have named the Lord of Dragonstone," he murmured. "There will be no riding back from this field before nightfall." Cersei broke the seal and read and then laughed again, that breathless laugh, as if she were surprised by the sound every time and did not like it. "They have set a cold man on a cold chair," she said. "We will make the chair warm." She sent riders to Rosby and Stokeworth. She sent letters to the Westerlands that would take more days than she had to spend. She sent a little boy with a lark's swift legs to the street of steel to find Tobo Mott and ask him how fast some helms could be made if a generous woman loved steel. She sent her maids to the kitchens for bread, and when they brought it, she broke no loaves and gave no crumbs. She told them to take the loaves to the courtyard and hand them from baskets without smiling. Men must not think bread is a caress, she said. The city heard, the way cities do, through shutters and over walls, in the way a name crosses a room and finds its way into a mouth that did not know it meant to speak it. Stannis. Some said it like spitting. Some said it like biting into something too cold and feeling their teeth ache. Renly said it like a joke, and then the joke stayed on his tongue like a taste he could not chase. Eddard Stark said it like a man says the name of a river he means to cross without ceremony. Wyman Manderly said it in the Merman's court, and Lamprey smiled, as if someone had poured sweet wine into the kitchen's washwater. White Harbor's chain came down across the inner mouth, as if to say the harbor was closed to those who needed it to be open. In the gullet, Davos spoke with Lyseni men who would cut their own sails before they let another man cut their price. He sent a bird to Dragonstone with the names of ship owners and the measure of their greed. He sent another to Harrenhal with the same because he was learning to put bits of the realm where other bits of the realm could use them. He was learning, too, that when you carry letters for kings you begin to look at the world as if the words might tip it. In Winterfell, Robb Stark read his father's, and his hand shook a little and then was steady. He rode out to the old winter town and walked the square where people brought grain to market, and he talked to them about law. They listened. He told them to salt fish and to do it well and to sell it to men who needed fish and to keep some for their own. "We will not be hungry," Robb said. And there was a lift in the town's breath when he said it that made Catelyn eat her own worry like a woman who does not say the word fear out loud for the sake of her children. The nights grew hotter in King's Landing while the messages went out and the answers came back, and the city taught itself some new songs. A man who sells turtles cut his price by a copper without meaning to and began to make it up by watering his turtles. Another man found a way to bake a loaf with more steam and less flour and began to boast it was a new fashion. The Queen's men moved like yellow beetles up the streets and back down. The city watch beat 3 men at the mud gate for shouting the wrong thing. Jen. Oa Slint told himself it was justice and did not like his own telling. Sansa went to the sept and prayed with tears she tried not to let fall because tears made her feel like a child. And she was learning that children are only children when men want to call them that. Arya trained until Syrio made her sit and drink water from a little clay cup and told her a story about a cat who had stolen a fish and found it was not stolen at all, but a fish that had wanted very much to be eaten. Ned walked the ramparts of the Red Keep and remembered the top of the wall, where wind is a thing you could lean on. He remembered his sister. He remembered the first time he had seen snow fall in a courtyard and how the flakes had seemed to want to be there. He told himself to sleep and did not. When he did sleep at last, he dreamed of a bench and 2 men on it and a third who had stood between them until they learned there was no need to. When the letters summoning Ser Barristan to swear again were placed in the old knight's hands, he looked at the parchment and then at Cersei and then past her, through the window where a gull hung in the bright air for a moment before it went on. "I will go," he said, and his voice sounded like a man unsheathing a blade he had kept oiled for a very long time. "Take your cloak," she said. He took it. He went to Harrenhal with 3 men and no fanfare, and Ned met him beneath the broken tower called Widows and took his hand, and when they looked at each other, the sense that men had kept something true alive between them passed like cold water between cupped palms. The coronation of Stannis Baratheon, such as it was, happened in a hall that did not want to witness any more promises. They put a plain circlet on his brow because there was no point in gilding iron, gilding flakes. He spoke a vow that was more like a contract. He did not look at his lady wife when he made it. He looked at the men and at the doors and at the weight of the world, and the weight looked back. Davos stood where Stannis could see him. Renly stood where Stannis could not. Eddard stood with the Archmesters and the Legate, and this time when he closed his eyes for a heartbeat, he did not see a godswood. He saw the street of flour and a boy with a hot loaf and the way the boy had run that first morning with the animal joy of hot bread under his arm. A crown and a council do not end a hunger. They order it. White Harbor kept its chain ready, but Wyman Manderly sent 4 cogs south loaded with dried cod and kept 6 more. and he wrote on the bills of lading that the cod was a gift from the north to the city that fed the rest of the realm, and men reading it asked themselves if the north were making a friend or an account. Davos's lists grew and grew, and he took a strange pride in how full of other men's greed they were, because he had learned to turn such things to service. Renly wrote a letter to Marjorie that was half joke and half sword. Cersei set down her mirror and then picked it up again, as if the glass could offer her a realm when the realm would not. Peter Baelish taught the gold to whisper louder. Varys taught men to whisper softer. And in the quiet that followed the loudest day, Ned Stark went to his daughters and sat while Arya polished a wooden sword until it shone, and Sansa stitched the smallest of stitches in a sampler that had a deer on it for no reason she would confess. And he spoke to them of Winterfell, not because he thought they would go there soon. He knew they would not, but because he wanted their minds to feel a clean, cold thing, and to remember its feel if ever they were lost in heat. "You will hear men say that law is only a word," he told them. "They are right. So is bread. And both feed men, one for a day and one for a life." Arya scowled as if the thought was too heavy for her small tongue and she would rather bite it. Sansa nodded, because nodding was something she did to show she understood even when she did not. "I will remember," she said. "You will forget," he said gently. "But when you need it, it will remember you." The next morning dawned like a bird finding thermals, rising without flapping. Bells sounded across the hills and the city and down the river and out across the lake to Harrenhal, where banners twitched in the light wind. Men who had hated each other 3 days ago shared ale and bread, because that is what men do after they have spoken great words. The world held its breath. It let it out, took another. The embargo did not vanish with a crown. Changed shape. White Harbor's harbor grew busy in ways harbors grow busy when men attach morality to grain. Some ships took Manderley coin and then went where gold told them to go instead. Davos's black-sailed friends caught one and let another go, because letting it go bought them a better price later. The Reach sent carts in 50s and held hundreds, and men counted and pretended not to count. The Iron Bank marked down interest rates in ledgers that would later make a young clerk proud of the precision of his columns. King's Landing learned to live with hunger the way a man learns to live with an old wound. It aches when the weather changes and men rub it and tell themselves it is almost gone. The council that had been called to decide a king did not decide everything. No council does. It decided where the road went. Men still had to ride it. Cersei did not stop plotting because a bench had told her a thing she did not like. Her plots grew thinner and sharper, like a starving blade. Renly did not stop smiling. His smile learned a few new notes. Stannis did not stop being himself. He learned a little to listen to a man who had once smuggled onions. Eddard did not stop walking with his back straight in a city that bent men. He learned to bend just enough to see around corners. When, 10 days later, the first true bread riot rose like a squall and died as a shower will when men find shelter quickly, it did so in a city where men had seen that lords could still speak together without instantly cutting each other's throats. That matters even when the baker's shelves are bare. When a boy in the Street of Flower threw his first stone at a watchman, he aimed lower than he might have. The stone hit a boot. The watchman cursed. He did not pull his sword. He shoved the boy. The boy ran. Later, that boy would remember that he had chosen a boot over a breast. It would make him a different man. Winter would still come. Men would still die for things they loved and for things they only thought they loved because someone clever had told them to. But the road had been set. It ran from Winterfell to King's Landing, and from White Harbor's damp stones to the Black Hall where a crown had sat on a brow without flattery. It ran past a girl with a wooden sword and a girl with a needle. It ran through a baker's hands. It ran, too, through the fat fingers of a lord who loved his city and his belly and his honor in an order he would not specify. It ran through a smuggler's palm, scarred and steady. Eddard Stark slept at last without the smell of rot in his dreams. He woke to an east wind that smelled faintly of the narrow sea and to the sound of bells. One of them the little bell he had brought with him from Winterfell, which he kept on his table because the boys had rung it once when they played at being lords who came to say important things. He raised it and made it speak, and the sound cut clean through the morning. The city breathed with him. Far away, White Harbor's chain lay coiled. ready in case the sea forgot what men had asked of it. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stood at a window as salt air came in and did not smile. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon kissed his bride with a skill that made women measure their husbands and sigh, and then he went to his horse. In the Vale, Bronze Yohn showed a boy how to hold a sword so that it did not own him. In Winterfell, Robb stood with his hands wrapped around a cup of hot broth and felt the warmth go into his fingers like a promise. The realm had not been saved. Realms are not saved. They are farmed, beaten, mended, and eaten. But the lie that had been fattening itself on song had been taught a different diet, and that might yet keep men alive long enough to remember the taste of truth when the next lie came in a softer coat. Arya Stark ran down a corridor where the breeze pulled at her hair and laughed because today Syrio would make her miss and she would love him for it. Sansa Stark set one last stitch and trimmed a thread so small no one would ever see it and felt a sudden absurd pride, as if she had made a thing that would not unravel. In the yard, a baker's boy chased a dog that had stolen his loaf, and both of them were quick. On the street below, a little girl held a crust in both hands and ate it very slowly, as if she had learned that eating slowly could be a prayer. Above her, the bells spoke. They said nothing a man could write down in a book. They said everything a man might remember if he had sat beneath a tree and smelled clean cold and told himself that the road he had chosen would, with luck and labor, lead him where men could breathe.